Welcome to yet another edition of Stories of the Dark on your Thursday evening. I'm Glen Clark, your host, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Tonight we're going to be talking about phone calls from the dead. It's kind of an interesting subject that I looked into recently. I've never experienced one, and I've lost family members and never, to my knowledge anyway, got any strange or any phone calls like that. So earlier I posted on Twitter, if you have any stories about this, share them with me on my email. That's storiesofthedark1@gmail.com, storiesofthedark1@gmail.com. And a couple of interesting little personal stories to tell you. Yesterday I went to the eye doctor. Hadn't been for quite many years, and had my eyes dilated. Very interesting experience. Try walking around Walmart after you've had your eyes dilated. It's a very interesting experience because you can't see anything. And believe me, I ran into a few things too, so you know, that happens. So, and today the girlfriend, BlakCircleGirl, and I we're car hunting. So we were at this car dealership, and we both got the nice smell of barbecue. So we found out it was a barbecue restaurant like right next door. So we went and had lunch. And if you're ever in the Apple Valley area, I would highly recommend this place because it was awesome. So it's called Hallelujah Barbecue. Looks like it's a father and like a family-owned business, but very nice people. You know, they talked to us, treated us like, you know, we belong there. So yeah. If you're in the Apple Valley area, it's called Hallelujah Barbecue. It's on Bear Valley Road in Apple Valley. Think you'll really enjoy it. So it is so good, as BlakCircleGirl just said, and I fully agree with her because it was good. And believe me, they give you enough that you can actually bring home with you too. So anyway, let's get to some news of the day. So, white social studies teacher ousted over slavery lesson plans to sue over reverse racism. That's rich. A white Bronx social studies teacher facing termination for a controversial lesson on slavery says she is a victim of reverse racism and has filed a lawsuit, which her lawyer says could be worth $1 billion. The notorious teacher's attorney even says white teachers who work in the Bronx deserve combat pay. Sounds like interesting teaching going on there. The Daily News exclusively reported in February that middle school 118 teacher Patricia Cummings singled out black students and told them to lie on the floor for a lesson on U.S. slavery, and then stepped on their backs to show them what it felt like, according to several students and one staffer. The story sparked protest and reactions from an array of elected officials, but Cummings says in a notice of claim filed in anticipation of a lawsuit against the city, parents, students, and the media that the account of the lesson is all wrong. She says she is the victim of reverse discrimination, defamation, negligence, and other claims worth the eye-popping sum. Her notice of claim, which says she's owed $120 million in damages, even states that the lawsuit could become a class action reverse racism suit worth upwards of $1 billion. It's scandal, Cummings' attorney Tim Leote said. There is blatant racism and reverse discrimination in the public schools of New York City. This is why white parents do not want to send their children there. Leote said it's past time for the Board of Education to wake up to reverse racism. It's no longer the blacks and minorities who are being discriminated against, he said. It is discrimination against white teachers who are making great sacrifices to be there. In Cummings' version of the lesson on January 9th, she took advantage of a teachable moment after showing a 5-minute clip from the movie Freedom. She says she asked 4 student volunteers to sit close together to show the cramped conditions aboard a slavery ship crossing the Middle Passage. But she denied that any child laid on the floor at the time during the demonstration, and denied making any physical contact with any student. Cummings also alleges that the Education Department investigators ignored evidence and a witness who backed up the version of her accounts. But DOE spokesman Doug Cohen said an investigation into Cummings' actions determined she used poor judgment. We've begun the process of firing Miss Cummings based on an investigation of the unacceptable behavior and her performance as an educator, Cohen said. We'll review this baseless lawsuit. The news story sparked a public outcry. Mayor de Blasio, Councilman Juman Williams, other politicians, and even Power 105 host Charlemagne the God, so I apologize for that if I got that name wrong, all wrongfully humiliated Cummings and labeled her a racist, her claim says. The Bronx has been described by some as a war zone. White teachers who work there should get combat pay, Leote said. This is a case of blatant reverse discrimination, and we're going to teach the city and those responsible a lesson. This goes for Mayor de Blasio, who will have to learn that his constituents are multi-ethnic, racial, and religious. They include white people and dedicated teachers. The notice of claim strongly criticizes the news's coverage of the lesson. The claim states that the news relied on the account of one student in Cummings' class, when in fact the article quoted 2 different students and reported that students and a staffer described what happened. And we'll go ahead and leave that one there. And the next one I want to read for you is Bill Cosby sued for unpaid legal bills of $282,000. As a disgraced comedian, Bill Cosby didn't have enough problems. A Philadelphia-based law firm is suing Cosby for paying more than $282,000 in legal fees generated from representing the entertainer in civil and criminal cases related to sexual assault allegations that go back decades. According to the Legal Intelligencer, Snyder, Harrison, Siegel, and Lewis filed a complaint in state court in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, against the now-imprisoned entertainer on September 21st, demanding payment of their bills along with late fees, interest, and costs. Cosby hired the firm in March 2016, months after criminal charges were filed against him for drugging and sexually assaulting former Temple University employee Andrea Constant. He was represented by Snyder Harrison partner Sam Silver. The 81-year-old Cosby paid for work Snyder Harrison performed through the end of July 17th, but he still owes the firm money from August 2017 to July 25th of this year. Silver continued to represent Cosby leading up to the April 18, 2018 criminal trial, despite the outstanding balances. He also represented Cosby in a breach of contract lawsuit that Cosby filed against Constant, which the entertainer dropped. And we'll move on to the next story, or actually no, I think we'll go ahead and we'll take a break and come back and we'll go ahead and start the show, and we're going to be talking about phone calls from the dead, so that should be an interesting show. So I'll come back after this break and we'll start the show. I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark. Welcome back to Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and tonight we're going to be talking about phone calls from the dead. And as always, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I also have SoundCloud, PodOMatic, and Pinecast for my shows. You can catch those there. All the links will be posted in the description part of this video on YouTube and on the other websites as well. And also, just as a reminder, I am planning a Halloween show. So if you have any good, scary, true or not ghost stories, I don't really care as long as they're really good. And they're really scary. Go ahead and you can email those to me at storiesofthedark1@gmail.com, and I will read those and possibly use them on the show. I'll also at that time hopefully have my have a better way to do the show, and hopefully we'll even do the show live, and you can call in on my on Skype when I get that all ready to go. So, without any further ado, let's read from angelsghosts.com. Phone calls from the dead. Can ghosts call people by way of electronic devices such as telephones and cell phones in order to get a message to loved ones? Some say that it is possible. I can recall several ghost stories about telephone calls from the dead. Often the stories tell of a last-minute message such as "I love you" or "goodbye." The loved one receiving the true long-distance call is often shocked, recognizing the voice on the other end of the phone as being a deceased family member. Strange enough, when such ghost calls from the dead occur, caller ID screens have been said to display weird phone numbers such as 000000000. There have even been reports of people receiving the ghost calls as messages on their answering machine or voicemail. And it says, to hear one of these phantom telephone calls from the dead recorded on an answering machine, it says, listen to this real phone call from the dead. So you can have a look on their website and click on that. Again, that's angelsghosts.com, and I'll have the link posted on the video. The first dead call. One of the first reports of a phone call from the dead came in 1969, where a New Jersey rock musician received a ghostly phone message from his grandmother who had died 2 days prior. The dead cousin. Another fascinating report of a telephone call from a ghost occurred in Cheshire in 1977. A young lady received a ghost call from her cousin Shirley, who had died only a short time before. In many cases, phone calls from the dead, the communication will be described as full static, not clear, and the messages will be brief. Should a person question the ghost, oftentimes the phone will hang up abruptly. Ghost phone calls from the dead recur randomly and are not the norm. The voice on the other end of the phone seems to always sound just like the person's voice before their passing. It is not uncommon for the ghostly discussion to fade away, become faint. In an unusual twist, some ghost calls will seem to include an operator who makes the connection, especially in older stories involving telephones. The static telephone call. In another spirited phone call ghost story, a paranormal investigator received a call to investigate a house. The investigator was surprised that the man on the other end of the phone could have found his number, for it was a new cell phone and the number had not been given out. Still, the investigator followed up with the phone number the man had given him during their brief conversation. Upon calling the number, the investigator found a woman at the other end of the phone. She quickly informed the investigator that the name of the man who he had asked about her was her husband, who had died a decade previously and was not still alive. Her husband couldn't have made the phone call to the investigator. Rattled, the investigator decided to call the number back that the man had called him from and received an earful of static, followed by an abrupt termination of the call. This happened 2 times, so the investigator then called the woman back and explained the entire strange story. He was stupefied to find out the old static-filled phone number he had dialed was indeed the woman's and her deceased husband's old number from the house he had died in when it burnt down. Very interesting. A ghost call in England. In 2008, a man from England shared a different ghost call story with the media. This ghost story concerned his dead wife contacting him by way of his cell phone. Not only did Frank claim to have received phone calls from the dead, but further claimed that his deceased wife and son also visited with him in his home. Frank's son died from a brain tumor, and his wife's life ceased 3 months later due to a heart attack. The odd story of the ghost phone call began when Frank noticed he had a missed call on his mobile phone, but the cell phone never rang. The call came from his empty home, a place where he no longer wished to visit after his family had passed so tragically. When he entered his home, he immediately recognized the smell of his wife's cigarettes and her perfume. Frank says she always had a cell phone with her, and they even buried her with it. Not only have they answered strange phone calls, but they have even received text messages, so they also believe to be from her. Later on, I've got a YouTube video, and I believe that in that one they also talk about this one and maybe one of the others. I'm not quite sure. So anyway, I think we'll take another quick break and play some music, and I'll come back and we'll read some more. I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark. welcome back to Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and we are talking about phone calls from the dead. And just a future show note for everybody, BlakCircleGirl and I will be making another trip to the local cemetery, and I plan on taking the recorder out, and she'll take some pictures, and I'll do some of the recording for the show from there, like I did last time. Hopefully, a little bit longer than last time. Last time we had problems with sprinklers going on and off, and people walking around, so we didn't stay as long as we wanted to. So we're probably going to do that. We're thinking maybe tomorrow evening, something like that. So that may be tomorrow's show, or I may use that to do a later program. But anyway, back to the reading here. This comes from MysteriousUniverse.org. Phantom Phone Calls from Beyond the Grave. Throughout human history, there has been a powerful urge to communicate with the dead, and the persistent belief that they also reach out to communicate with us. The specifics of how this happens have evolved over time with our means to do so. In the past, it was through seances, spirit mediums, rituals, or dreams. But we have come a long way as technology becomes ever more advanced, so it seems does the methods by which the deceased can reach out to speak with us. With recording equipment, we have come to be able to record the voices of spirits through what is known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, whereas a mysterious phantom voice, or voices which are not heard at the time of recording, show up later on playback. An extension of this is the modern phenomenon of ghostly phone calls, literally getting a call, voicemail, or email message from the dead. After all, it makes perfect sense that in this age of phones and nearly everyone possessing a mobile device, it seems like it would be the perfect way for the spiritual realm to try and reach out to contact us. Here we look at some cases of ghosts that got with the times and allegedly made phone calls from beyond the grave. One of the most high-profile accounts of a call from the dead was made to none other than best-selling author Dean Koontz, which he said would later relate to author and biographer Catherine Ramsland. Koontz claimed that one day he received a call on his unlisted office phone, and that when he picked it up he could hear the voice of a woman who sounded as if she were far away. Koontz explained that the woman spoke out with great urgency, giving the simple yet chilling statement of "Please be careful." When Koontz asked who it was, the voice did not acknowledge him, but rather repeated the same warning 3 more times. As the voice started to fade into the distance, after which the line fell silent, leaving the author to sit there pondering what he had just heard, eerily he would claim that the voice had sounded exactly like that of his mother, who had passed away 20 years earlier, as he remarked. It was such a strange call. 2 days later, Koontz went to visit his father at a mental health facility where he was being treated for unspecified behavioral problems. Allegedly, when Koontz entered the room, his father inexplicably lashed out at him with a small knife. The author was able to wrestle the weapon away and claims that when he exited the room holding the knife, he was confronted by armed police officers who ordered him to drop it. Koontz, who was still bewildered by the fact that his own father had just tried to kill him, tried to explain the situation, but was warned that he was going to be shot if he didn't comply. Finally, he did drop the knife and the situation was resolved, but not without sticking in his head forever. Kuntz would later ponder whether the strange phone call he had received had been a warning from beyond the grave from his mother. An even earlier account of ghostly phone calls comes from 1969, when New Jersey rock musician named Carl Uphoff claimed he was called by his grandmother, whom he had been close and who had died 2 days earlier. The elderly woman had been deaf, but had still always called on the phone to him or his friends to ask if Carl was there. Even though she couldn't hear the response, and much to the annoyance of his friends and bandmates, Carl claims that one night in 1969 he received a call while hanging out with some friends. On the other end of the line, he says he unmistakably heard the voice of his grandmother. When he asked how she was able to call when she was dead, the woman hung up. Over the next several days, there would be numerous calls of this nature, and each time Carl asked her where she was or how she could call the line when the line went dead. This went on for some time until the calls suddenly stopped. Also, from the late 1960s comes a story of Sima Lieberman. At the time, she was in love with a man named Johnny, who she had planned to marry. The two had moved in together and things were like a dream come true. Then one night, Sima claims that she got a call at night from Johnny, but that the line was filled with static and his voice sounded urgent and rushed, and allegedly told her, "I just want you to know that I love you and I'll never be mean to anybody again." When she asked him what was wrong, Sima claims that the line simply went dead. She claims that when she had tried to call him back numerous times, but was only met with a dial tone. 2 hours later, she received yet another call, this time from Johnny's mother, saying that he had been shot and killed the night before as he sat in his car. To this day, Sima insists that it was her dead lover reaching out to comfort her from beyond the grave. A rather bizarre, well-circulated and allegedly recorded case of a call from the dead happened in 1994, when a paranormal researcher by the name of George Meek was contacted from the land of the dead by his long-deceased colleague, Konstantin Radiv. Meek and Radiv had been eminent researchers of recording and researching electronic voice phenomena in which disembodied voices of spirits are purportedly caught on audio tape. Together, the two men had made it their life work to attempt to investigate and prove the phenomena, and were claimed to have made several groundbreaking recordings to this end. But their research was cut short when Radiv's tragic death in 1974. Then in 1994, Meek claims that he had started being contacted by his long-dead colleague through calls, emails, and even fax. It seems oddly fitting that such a prominent researcher of EVP could come back to successfully become a part of the very phenomena he had so doggedly studied. Meek claims that he successfully made recordings of these calls from Radiv, one of which you can listen to in its deeply creepy entirety here. And if you'd like to, you can hear that on mysteriousuniverse.org. And continuing on, for added maximum spook effect, listen to it by yourself with the lights turned off. Also is the case of a woman simply identified as Betty, who in the late 1990s got a very strange call indeed. Betty had been working at a new job at an office, and her co-workers had been out at lunch. During this time, she claims the phone of one of the other workers rang, and she absent-mindedly picked it up. A man's voice on the other end asked for an unfamiliar name before correcting himself and asking for Mary. which was the name of the woman whose phone she had picked up. When Betty told him that Mary was out and that she could take a message, he allegedly said, "Could you tell her this is her brother? I really missed her at the family gathering, and I wished that she had gone." When Mary returned, Betty passed along a message, which provoked a shocked reaction in the woman, prompting her to run off crying. Another co-worker then explained to the perplexed Betty that Mary's brother had died in a car crash 5 years before, and that she had not gone to a recent family reunion 2 weeks prior due to her husband's health problems. The co-worker also related that an unfamiliar name was a nickname which only her brother had called her. In another account in 2003, a man from Lancashire named Frank Jones, that one was in an earlier one, so we'll go ahead and skip that. So right now I think what I'll do is I'll go and we'll play a YouTube video. This comes from Unexplained Mysteries. It's called 5 Creepy and Mysterious Phone Calls from the Dead.
Of electronic devices, such as telephones and cell phones, in order to get a message to loved ones. Some say that it's possible. In this video we count down 5 creepy phone calls that people believe have come from the dead. A paranormal investigator received a call to investigate a house. The investigator was surprised that the man on the other end of the phone could have found his number, for it was a new cell phone and the number hadn't yet been given out. Still, the investigator followed up with the phone number the man had given him during their brief conversation. Upon calling the number, the investigator found a woman at the other end of the phone. She quickly informed the investigator that the name of the man he'd asked her about was her husband, who had died a decade previously. Her husband couldn't have made the phone call to the investigator. Rattled, the investigator decided to call the number back that the man had called him from and received an earful of static, followed by an abrupt termination of the call. This happened 2 times, so the investigator then called the woman back and explained the strange story. He was astonished to find out the old static-filled phone number he had dialed was indeed the woman's and her deceased husband's old telephone number from the house he had died in when it burnt down. A terrible train wreck occurred on the 12th of September 2008 in California's San Fernando Valley. A Metrolink commuter train carrying 225 riders collided with a Union Pacific freight train. In what is now referred to as the Chatsworth crash, 135 people were injured. Of those injured, 87 people were hospitalized and 25 died. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, which investigated the cause of the collision, the Metrolink train ran through a red signal before entering a section of single track where the opposing freight train had been given the right of way by the train dispatcher. The National Transportation Safety Board faulted the Metrolink train's engineer for the collision, concluding that he was distracted by text messages he was sending while on duty. One of the fatalities on the Metrolink train was 49-year-old Charles Pegg, a Delta Airlines customer service representative from Salt Lake City. He and his fiancée had put off marriage until Pegg could relocate to the Los Angeles area where she lived. Charles died on impact, but his body was not immediately found. During those hours, Pegg's mobile phone made a series of calls to his fiancée and many family members. 35 calls were made from Pegg's phone to members of his family and inner circle, all of which consisted of a few minutes of silence before disconnection. As the calls continued, authorities used Pegg's cell signal in order to locate his body, which they eventually did 1 hour after the last call. Pegg's phone was never found. In 2008, a man from England shared a different ghost story with the media. This ghost story concerned his wife contacting him by the way of his cell phone. Not only did Frank claim to have received phone calls from the dead, but further claimed that his deceased wife and son started to appear in his home. Frank's son died from a brain tumor, and his wife died 3 months later due to a heart attack. The odd story of the ghost phone call began when Frank noticed he had a missed call on his mobile phone, but the cell phone never rang. The call came from his empty home, a place where he no longer wished to visit after his family had passed away so tragically. When he entered his home, he immediately recognized the smell of his wife's cigarettes and her perfume. Frank says she always had a cell phone with her and they even buried her with it. Not only has Frank answered strange phone calls, but he's even received text messages that he believes to be from her. In April of 2011, a YouTube user uploaded a recording of a voicemail she received. From the description, we learn that her grandfather died on December the 23rd, 2010. The voicemail was received in March, and the user claimed that her phone only rang once before the voicemail was recorded. What she heard on the voicemail was chilling. The white noise in the background is broken by the faint whisper of the word grandpa.
Saved message. Saved message.
Author Dean Koontz was subject to a spooky phone call of his own. Koontz was in the office when the phone rang. The voice on the other line was faint and female, and it only spoke 2 words, "Be careful." Koontz asked who it was. His number was unlisted, and it was a very strange way to start a conversation. The voice did not answer, but just repeated the warning 3 more times. After he hung up the phone, Koontz reflected that the voice sounded eerily like the voice of his deceased mother. 2 days after this phone call, Koontz was visiting his father in the facility where he lived. Apparently, his father had purchased a fishing knife and sharpened the blade to become razor sharp. When Koontz entered the room, his father moved to stab him with the knife. A few onlookers saw the altercation and called the police. Koontz was able to wrestle the knife away and stepped into the hallway just as the police arrived. The police told him to drop the knife, but Koontz tried to tell them that he wasn't the one they wanted. They asked a second time and he thought of the phone call. He realized that they were going to shoot if he didn't comply. He dropped the knife, believing that the phone call was a warning. So that was 5 mysterious phone calls from the dead. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more countdown videos.
And we're back on Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and that was from Unexplained Mysteries. It was 5 creepy and mysterious phone calls from the dead. And I know they read a couple of stories that I had already read about myself, so I apologize for that. The next video I'd like to play for you comes from the Paranormal Scholar. It's called Phone Calls from the Dead, the documentary. I'll play that, and we'll take a break after I come back after this video, and I believe I have one more video I'll share with you, and one more website I'll read from. So we'll play this, and I'll come right back. I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark.
Reminder to please click the bell icon next to the subscribe button if you have not done so already. That way you won't miss any of our uploads and will be notified whenever we upload new content. Thank you. For those pondering the possibility of life after death, an important question arises. If spirits of the dead exist, is there a way to communicate with them? To answer this, many have looked to technology. And, strangely enough, there are reports of technology, in particular telephone calls, supposedly being used from beyond the grave. In some reports, phantom phone calls are associated with the number 000-000-0000. People have described receiving calls from this unusual number at or around the time of funerals, only to answer the call and hear static. Unable to explain the source of the call, they have been left wondering if it was their deceased loved one trying to speak with them one last time. In other cases, however, actual messages are delivered, with many believing that they are speaking with a living person and not someone who has passed away. Perhaps surprisingly, telephone calls from the dead are a hot topic of research for some scientists, including psychologist Dr. Callum Cooper of the University of Northampton. According to him, the phenomenon of phantom phone calls is starting to get more and more complex with all the new technology we're creating. If you go back to the earlier stuff, you've got landline telephone, but now we've got mobile phones, we've got text messages, we've got emails. One of the earliest reports of phantom phone calls dates back to the early 20th century, when a London solicitor, David Wilson, received bizarre messages on a machine he had made himself from a wireless telegraph. Devised to use the Morse code system, Wilson's communication machine first received strange messages in 1913 when used by his friend. The signals were delivered in Morse as audible beeps. Astonishingly, the device continued to relay messages even after the receiving wire had been disconnected. With the help of a second witness, Wilson translated each message as they came through. The telephonic messages the machine received appeared to be meaningful. In January 1915, this was received. Great difficulty, await message, 5 days, 6 evening. Similar instructional phrases like wait until next Tuesday also came through. However, despite waiting, nothing ever happened that illuminated on the message's meanings. Confused as to why he was receiving such messages without any input, the solicitor invited researchers to inspect his machine and try to explain the source of the Morse code. No explanation and no source of the signal could be found. After publishing his experiments, David Wilson and his Morse code communications disappeared from the records. The case of David Wilson inspired others to ponder the possibility of electronic communications being delivered from beyond the grave. Some even took the idea further, purposefully constructing machines to aid in interdimensional communication. From 1920 to 1921, the English-born psychic medium and composer Francis Grierson claimed to have had detailed conversations with spirits on the other side by means of a psychophone. Far from speaking with any old ordinary Joe, Grierson published transcripts of conversations with Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Benjamin Franklin. These conversations were extensive and intelligent, and by deviating from contemporary popular opinions, seemed to suggest insight and opinion unconstrained by the time in which they were received. In Grierson's own words, the psychophonic waves by which the messages were imparted are as definite as those received by wireless methods. As unbelievable as Grierson's reports may seem, he was far from alone in his claims. Telephonic communication experiments were something of a trend in the 1920s. With the help of his eldest son, British psychical researcher F.R. Melton designed and built a psychic telephone in an attempt to converse with the dead. He even published a booklet which described in detail the different components of the machine. As well as containing expected elements including a transmitter, receiver and battery, Melton's design included a balloon at the center which was filled with the breath of a psychic medium. In 1920, during an interview for Scientific American, inventor Thomas Edison discussed his plans to construct a similar machine. In his own words, "I do claim that it is possible to construct an apparatus which will be so delicate that if there are personalities in another existence or sphere who wish to get in touch with us, in this existence or sphere, this apparatus will at least give them a better opportunity to express themselves than tilting tables and raps and Ouija boards and mediums and other crude methods now purported to be the only means of communication." When Edison died in 1931, the fate of this invention was unknown. Some records suggest that he did indeed build a spirit phone, but that it failed to produce results. Whatever the case may be, no blueprints for any such apparatus designed by Edison are known to exist. In modern times, one can see the use of so-called ghost boxes, EVP recorders, and other electronic communication-based ghost hunting devices as a continuation of the ideas proposed by inventors like Edison. For all the effort expended by those actively seeking telephonic conversation with the other side, it seems that some of the most compelling cases of phone calls from the dead have happened spontaneously, often involving people who do not realize that the person who they believe they are speaking with is dead. In 1981, parapsychologists E. McAdams and Raymond Bayliss published just such a case which dated back to 1978. The report described how Madeline White had returned home from work one evening to be told by her son John that an old friend of hers had called. Madeline stated that she hadn't seen or spoken to her friend Edie or her husband in several years. Regardless, the following day, her son told her that Edie had called again. When Madeline asked if she had left a number, John told her that she hadn't, but that she had said that she would call back. The next day, Edie called again. When John asked for her phone number so that his mother could phone her back, Edie simply said it doesn't matter. Later, concerned, Madeline phoned a mutual friend who gave her Edie's number. Upon phoning, Edie's husband answered. When Madeline asked to speak with Edie, she was met with silence. Edie's husband told her that Edie had died 3 days ago of cerebral hemorrhage. After that, Madeline never received another phone call from anyone named Edie. The calls stopped the day after she was buried. The intended recipient of a call being unaware that the caller is dead has been reported by others. Another remarkable phantom phone call was described to a psychical researcher in the 1970s. The submitter explained how, some years ago, he and his grandmother would often walk together into town and back, always leaving her doors open. When his grandmother's phone bill came out to be much higher than usual, she put in a request to have her phone line disconnected, believing that someone had been taking advantage of her doors being open and sneaking in to use her phone. However, early one night, she received a phone call from her friend Lizzie Bartlett in West Virginia. Her friend told her that she was going away, but that everything was all right and that she could only say a few words, but that she would hear about it in a few days' time. Understandably, the grandmother was confused as to why she had received the call when it was supposed to be disconnected. When she and her grandson contacted the operator, he reassured them that it was indeed disconnected. The lineman even came out the following evening, climbed the pole, and pointed out that the wire was not connected. Inside the house, the wire was also disconnected, meaning that the phone connection was broken in 2 places. 3 days afterwards, the grandmother received a letter from the Bartlett family explaining that her friend Lizzie had died in the early night of the day before the letter was written. In all respects, the phone call was impossible. It appeared to have come from beyond the grave and received on a disconnected line. Other than branding the report as a hoax, it is extremely difficult to explain this case in terms other than the paranormal. There seems to be an endless well of anecdotal evidence of phone calls from the dead, yet such reports are problematic. Not only do they rely on the truthfulness of those reporting them, but also their ability to perceive and accurately judge their own experiences. Regardless of these inherent issues, it is important to stress that anecdotal evidence of strange happenings should not be ignored altogether. There is still value in personal experience, especially when similar accounts are reported over and over again. Whilst spontaneous cases, by their very nature of being unexpected, are rarely ever recorded in real time, that is not to say that it has never happened. On the 12th of April 2011, a video was uploaded to YouTube which alleges to contain the audio of a peculiar voicemail message received 2 weeks before. According to the description, the uploader's landline phone went to voicemail after only 1 ring. When she checked the voicemail message, she heard a lot of static and then a whispering voice.
Saved message.
The uploader believes that it says Grandpa. Their grandfather had passed away just a few months earlier on December the 23rd, 2010, aged 101. It seems that as technology advances, bringing us voicemail, mobile phones, text messages and emails, so does the phenomenon of anomalous telephonic messages. Researcher Dr. John G. Combs claims to have received a series of paranormal text messages in 2009. Whilst working in his office, an old mobile phone, which had been abandoned in an office drawer, unused for several years, turned itself on and received a text. The message read, "Remember the anniversary." On another occasion, it did the same thing. This time, the text message read, "Remember the birthday." The first message had been received the day before the anniversary of his son's passing. The second, the day before the anniversary of his mother's death. With no sender information, there was no explanation as to where the text messages had been sent from, or indeed how the phone, drained of power for several years, had turned on by itself. Strangely, the old phone did not even contain a SIM card, meaning that it should not have been able to send or receive information. When considering the possibility of a text message being received with the sender details withheld or missing, some network providers have stated that this is impossible. Is it then the case that as technology advances, spirits of the dead are provided with a wider range of mediums through which to send messages to the living? Some cases even suggest that phone calls from the dead have delivered meaningful messages, even when no words were exchanged. On the 12th of September 2008, a Metrolink commuter train in Los Angeles crashed with a freight train. At least 25 people perished in the collision. More than 100 others were injured. One of the passengers on the train was Charles E. Peck. For 11 hours after the accident, a number of his family members received phone calls from Peck's phone. His fiancée, his stepmother, his brother, his sister, and his son all reported receiving calls. However, when they answered, all they heard was static. Returning the calls only went to voicemail. A total of 35 calls were made from Peck's phone to his family after the crash. The phone calls excited the rescue teams, who thought that Charles Peck might still be alive and was simply too injured to speak when his family members answered his calls. An hour after the last call was made, rescuers found Peck. He had died upon impact. According to his fiancée, "We gave the rescuers a description and they spent the next couple of hours looking for him. They did end up finding him, and they said that he had died immediately on impact and that there was no way he could have been calling us." After examining the body, the coroner was unable to find any sign that Peck had survived for any amount of time after the crash. The final call from Peck's phone came at 3:28 a.m. His time of death was 4:22 p.m. the previous day. When the calls were made, he was already dead. Peck's fiancée described the trauma of answering his calls.
And we were yelling in the phone, hang in there, baby, we're going to get you out, you're going to be okay. And the emotional side of my brain it was just Chuck letting us know that he knew that we were scared for him and letting us have hope.
Thank you for watching. If you found this topic interesting and would like to learn more, I suggest reading Dr. Callum Cooper's book, Telephone Calls from the Dead. I have put a link to it in the description, and also to our website's article, which contains additional further reading suggestions. Finally, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not check out the one suggested on screen now.
And we're back. Stories of the Dark. I'm Glen Clark, and we're going to take a little break right now and play some music and come back and have one more video to share with you, and then we'll wrap up the program. So, once again, I'm Glen Clark, and this is Stories of the Dark, and we are talking about phone calls from the dead. and welcome back to Stories of the Dark. I am your host, Glen Clark, and we're talking about phone calls from the dead. And I've got one last YouTube video I want to share for you, and then we'll wrap up the program. This one comes from Strange But True Stories. You can have a look at all their videos. It's called 8 True Stories of Phone Calls from the Other Side, and it says again true stories. So I'll play this for you, and I'll come back and we'll wrap up the program. Glen Clark, this is Stories of the Dark.
Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. The call is coming from inside the house. That line doesn't have the terror that it once did prior to everybody having cell phones. Back when the movie When a Stranger Calls came out in 1979, those words would send shivers down the spines of anybody. But phone calls can still bring a certain amount of terror and confusion, especially when the person on the other end doesn't exist in this world any longer. As fantastic as it seems, the mystery of phone calls from the dead is not an uncommon one. Those who have researched the phenomenon have determined that these calls usually occur within the first 24 hours of the death. But there have been cases in which the calls were received as long as 2 years after. The call is usually filled with heavy static, and the phantom caller's voice is faint, as if far away. Far away, indeed. Following are some remarkable instances of phantom phone calls as told by the people who experience them. In some cases, it's the phantom who answers the phone. But in every case, the experience remains unexplained. Something strange indeed. I come from a really close family. I have 2 older brothers, and we are really close in age, so we have a lot in common, and their friends are my friends. My oldest brother, Jeremy, had a really good friend named Joe. Joe was always hanging around our house, and he had this big personality and a distinctive voice. You always knew when Joe was around. But Joe got sick, and his health went downhill fast. He died soon after he got sick, and we were all devastated. He was young and vibrant just a short time before, and now he was gone. Joe's death obviously affected Jeremy a lot. My brother Matt and I were also deeply saddened, and we just went through the motions of life for a while. A few weeks after Joe died, the phone rang, and Matt answered. Hello? After a few moments, the voice on the other end said, "Hey Matt, it's Joe. Is Jeremy home? Something really strange seems to be going on." Matt freaked out. It didn't just sound like Joe. It was Joe. Matt couldn't really think of what to say, so he just said shakily, "No, he's not. I'm sorry." The phone line went dead, and Matt looked at the caller ID. It read, "Out of area." Yeah, no kidding. Matt thought that surely somebody was playing a sick joke. So he hit *69, which he did back in the waning days of the landline, to find out the number of the last call and call that person back. He couldn't retrieve the number, and we were all left dumbfounded. None of us ever received another call from Joe. To this day, we really have no explanation. Matt is convinced it was Joe's distinctive voice, and it still unnerves him to think about that call. Say goodbye, Grandpa. My husband lost his grandfather a long time ago, but just recently he has been experiencing something really weird. He has seen his grandfather's name on our caller ID, so we thought someone was calling from his grandfather's house. After that first call, we called back immediately, but no one was home. Just today, for the second time, He was at work, and clearly, along with coworkers, heard the phone ring. He answered it on the first ring, but only heard a dial tone. When he looked at the phone's directory, which has no caller ID but lists who he has called, he saw his grandfather's name again. What could this mean? How could it be happening? Money is useless here. One of my clients related this story to me a few years ago. At the time, she worked for the Department of Social Services, and one of the services she offered was to provide checks for emergency expenses. She had issued a check for $100 to one of her clients for utilities and was about to close the file when her phone rang. On the line was the woman to whom the check was issued. The woman sounded vague and distracted, but clearly said, "I won't be needing that $100 after all." My client made a note of it and went on with her other work. That evening at home, she was reading the newspaper when she saw the obituary of the woman she had talked with on the phone that day. The woman had died the day before.